I gave my son a kidney on Monday. By Thursday, he gave me 24 hours to get out of my own house. He stood at the foot of my hospital bed, holding the deed to the estate I built from the ground up, and told me I was no longer useful. He thought he had won the game. He thought he had stripped me of my dignity and my wealth. But as he turned to leave, thinking he was the new king of Chicago, my surgeon walked in with a terrified look on her face. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at him. And what she said next didn't just freeze him in his tracks. It started a countdown that no amount of money could stop. Before I tell you how I destroyed the ungrateful monster I raised, tell me in the comments. Have you ever sacrificed everything for family, only to be stabbed in the back? Like and subscribe if you believe in karma. The first thing I felt was not the satisfaction of saving a life. It was fire, a sharp, searing heat tearing through my right side, as if someone had left a lit torch inside my abdomen. I tried to inhale, but the air in the VIP suite of Northwestern Memorial Hospital was too thin, too sterile. It smelled of antiseptic and betrayal. The rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor was the only sound in the room. Beep, beep, beep. It was a lonely metronome counting away the seconds of my recovery. I blinked, trying to clear the fog of anesthesia and heavy painkillers. My mouth tasted like copper. I reached for the plastic cup of water on the bedside table, but my arm wouldn't cooperate. It fell back onto the sheets, heavy as lead. I was Richard Caldwell. I had reshaped the Chicago skyline with steel and glass. I had negotiated $100 million contracts without breaking a sweat. Yet here I was, defeated by a plastic cup and a surgical incision. I turned my head toward the window. Outside, the gray winter sky of Chicago pressed against the glass. Snow flurries danced in the wind, indifferent to my suffering. I checked the digital clock on the wall. It had been 72 hours since they wheeled me out of the operating theater. 72 hours since I let them cut me open to take a healthy organ and transplant it into my 32-year-old son, Jason. Where was he? The room should have been filled with flowers. There should have been cards. There should have been a son holding his father's hand, whispering thank you. Instead, there was only the emptiness of the luxury suite I had paid for. The leather armchairs in the corner were vacant. The vase on the sill was empty. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It pressed down on my chest, harder than the bandages. I told myself he was recovering too. It was a major surgery for him as well. But deep down, the architect in me knew the structure was unsound. Jason had recovered enough to post a selfie on Instagram yesterday. I had seen the notification pop up on my phone before the battery died. He was smiling, giving a thumbs up, captioning it, "New life loading." He didn't mention the donor. He didn't tag me. The heavy oak door clicked open. I shifted, fighting the pain, forcing a smile onto my pale face. Finally. Jason walked in. He wasn't in a wheelchair. He wasn't even wearing a hospital gown. He was dressed in a sharp navy suit, the one I bought him for his promotion to creative director. He looked healthy. Too healthy for someone who just had a transplant 3 days ago. But it wasn't his health that made my blood run cold. It was his eyes. There was no warmth in them, no gratitude. He looked at me the way a landlord looks at a tenant who is 3 months behind on rent. He didn't come to the bedside. He stopped at the foot of the bed, creating a deliberate distance. He didn't ask how I was feeling. He didn't ask if I was in pain. He simply reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He tossed it onto the bed. It landed on my legs with a soft thud, but it felt like a brick. "You look terrible, Dad," he said. His voice was smooth, devoid of any emotion. "I needed water." I croaked, my voice cracking from disuse. He didn't move to help. He just nodded at the envelope. "Read that first," he said. "It might dry your throat out even more." He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at me not as a father who had just saved his life, but as an asset that had finally depreciated to zero value. The charcoal gray Armani suit I had bought him for his 32nd birthday was pressed and spotless. There was not a wrinkle on him. It was a stark, violent contrast to the tubes running out of my arms and the catheter bag hanging discreetly by the bedside. He checked his Rolex. It was a Submariner I had gifted him when he graduated from Wharton. He looked bored. I waited for a hello. I waited for him to ask if the anesthesia had worn off, or if the incision was healing properly. Instead, he reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it. The heavy packet slid across the sterile hospital sheets and struck my thigh. The impact sent a jolt of pain radiating from my fresh surgical wound up to my ribs. I gritted my teeth to keep from groaning. I assumed it was the post-operative care instructions or perhaps some insurance paperwork that required a signature. My hands trembled as I reached for the clasp. My fingers felt numb and clumsy. Inside was a stack of legal documents. I recognized the letterhead immediately. It was from the family firm's legal department. At the top of the first page in bold capitalized letters were the words, "Notice of vacancy and transfer of assets." My vision blurred. I looked up at him. He was inspecting his fingernails. "What is this, Jason?" I asked. My voice was barely a whisper. "It is standard procedure, Dad." He said it so casually, he might as well have been ordering a latte. "We need to finalize the living arrangements before you are discharged. Brittany and I have been talking. We realized that your recovery is going to be messy. There will be nurses coming in and out. There is the smell of medicine, the equipment. It is just not the vibe we want for the lake house right now. We are entertaining investors next week. We cannot have a geriatric ward in the master wing." I stared at him. The lake house in Lake Forest was not just a house. I designed it. I laid the foundation with my own hands 30 years ago. I raised him in those hallways. "So where am I supposed to go?" I asked. He gestured to the second page of the document. "I found a place in the suburbs. It is a care facility. Shady Pines or something like that. It is decent. They have round-the-clock staff so Brittany does not have to worry about you falling down the stairs. I paid the first 3 months. After that, you can use your pension." He was evicting me. I had cut a piece of my body out of myself to keep him alive, and his response was to ship me off to a nursing home so his wife would not have to smell rubbing alcohol. "I signed the deed over to you last month for insurance purposes, Jason," I said, feeling the bile rise in my throat. "That was a formality. You know that house is mine. Technically, it is mine." He corrected me with a smirk that chilled me to the bone. "You signed the transfer. The title is in my name. The locks have already been changed. My security team will bring your personal effects to the facility on Friday. Do not try to come by the house. It would be embarrassing for everyone if I had to call the police on my own father for trespassing." He looked at his watch again. "I have to run. Brittany is waiting for lunch. Sign those by 5:00. My lawyer will pick them up." He turned his back on me and walked toward the door. The sound of his Italian leather shoes clicking on the linoleum floor felt like nails being driven into my coffin. He did not look back. Not once. I forced my eyes to focus on the text, fighting the blur caused by the morphine. The document was not a draft. It was a final notice, notarized and stamped. The language was cold, precise, and devoid of any familial connection. It referred to me only as the occupant. It stated that the occupant must surrender possession of the premises located at 1400 Lakeshore Drive no later than Friday at noon. That was 72 hours from now. I looked up at the calendar on the wall. Friday. I would barely be able to stand by Friday, let alone pack up 30 years of a life. The audacity of the timeline was breathless. Jason stopped at the door, his hand hovering over the handle. He did not turn around, but he paused, waiting for the inevitable protest. 3 days, Jason. I asked, the paper crinkling in my clenched fist. You expect me to clear out a 6,000 square foot house in 3 days while I have a drainage tube coming out of my abdomen? He turned then halfway. He looked annoyed as if I were a contractor delaying a project schedule. We hired professional movers, Dad. You do not have to lift a finger. They will box everything up. We even paid for the premium package. They label everything. It is not about the boxes. I snapped, feeling a stitch of pain in my side. It is my home. I built that house before you were born. I designed the master wing specifically for the morning light. Exactly. Jason interrupted, his eyes lighting up with a strange manic energy. That is exactly the point. Brittany needs that light. I stared at him, confused. Brittany needs the light. She is really getting into her wellness journey, he explained, as if this were a perfectly rational reason to evict a post-operative cancer survivor. She wants to turn the master suite into a private yoga and meditation studio. She says the energy in that room is perfect for her chakras, but she cannot focus if your old medical equipment and... He waved his hand vaguely. Your old man smell is lingering there. She needs a clean slate. I felt the blood drain from my face. A yoga studio. I was being discarded for a yoga studio. You are kicking me out so your wife can do downward dog in my bedroom. Do not be reductive, Dad. It is about mental health. Brittany has been under a lot of stress with the surgery and everything. She needs a sanctuary. And honestly, the guest house is too small for her vision. She wants the high ceilings. The room he was talking about was where his mother and I had spent 20 years. It was where I had nursed his mother through her final days. It was a space of memory of history. And now it was going to be gutted because Brittany needed a sanctuary to alleviate the stress of waiting for me to give her husband a kidney. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. And if I refuse, I asked, my voice low, if I decide to stay until I am medically cleared to leave. Jason sighed, a long, exaggerated exhalation of breath. Then the movers will move you with the furniture, or I will have the locks changed while you are asleep. Do not make this ugly, Dad. You signed the papers. You wanted to help us. Helping us means getting out of the way so we can live our lives. You have done your part. You gave the kidney. Now give us the space. He checked his reflection in the glass of the door, adjusted his tie, and finally walked out. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing me in with the silence and the piece of paper that said my life was worth less than a yoga mat. I looked at the stranger standing at the foot of my bed. This was the boy I had taught to ride a bike. This was the young man whose tuition to Yale I had paid without blinking an eye. I searched his face for a flicker of humanity, for a trace of the son who used to call me his hero. There was nothing, just the cold, hard stare of a businessman closing a deal. Jason, listen to yourself. I said, my voice trembling, not from fear, but from a rage so deep it threatened to tear my stitches. This is not about a yoga studio. This is not about the light or the feng shui. I am your father. 3 days ago, I lay on an operating table next to you. I let them stop my heart. I let them cut me open and take a piece of myself so you could live to see your next birthday. Does that mean nothing to you? Is a signature on a piece of paper more important than the blood running through your veins? I tried to sit up straighter to project the authority I had wielded for 40 years in the boardroom, but the pain anchored me to the mattress. You are my son, Jason. You cannot throw me out on the street like a bag of trash. Jason let out a short, dry laugh. It was a sound devoid of humor. He shook his head, looking down at the floor as if he were embarrassed for me. Stop being dramatic, Dad. It is pathetic. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a condescending whisper. You did a good thing. We appreciate the kidney. Really. We sent a thank you card. But that does not buy you a lifetime lease on my property. You signed the transfer last month. You stood in front of the notary and said you wanted to simplify your estate. Well, it is simple now. It is my house. You are a guest. And guests who overstay their welcome become trespassers. He leaned in, his cologne suffocating me. Do not make me treat you like a trespasser. You wouldn't dare, I hissed. Watch me. He reached for the phone on the bedside table. He did not hesitate. He punched the button for the nurse's station, but he asked to be transferred. I watched in disbelief as he spoke into the receiver, his voice suddenly changing pitch. He sounded scared. He sounded like a victim. Yes, this is Jason Caldwell in Suite 402. I need security up here immediately. My father is becoming agitated. He is shouting and throwing things. I think he is having a post-operative delirium. He is making threats against my wife. Yes, please send someone now. Thank you. He hung up the phone and smoothed his tie. The fear vanished from his face, instantly replaced by that same smug satisfaction. There, he said. Now you have a choice. You can sign the voluntary vacate order quietly, or you can explain to the guard why you are harassing the homeowner. Your blood pressure is rising, Dad. It is not good for your recovery. I stared at him, my mouth dry. He had weaponized the hospital staff against me. He had turned my recovery room into an interrogation cell. Get out, I whispered. Jason checked his watch again. The guards will be here in 2 minutes. If the papers aren't signed by then, I will tell them you tried to attack me. Who do you think they will believe? The confused old man on morphine, or the CEO in the Armani suit? He uncapped a pen and held it out to me. The tip of the pen hovered inches from my chest like a dagger waiting to strike. The heavy door clicked shut, and the sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. Jason was gone. He did not look back. He did not say goodbye. He simply walked out of my life, leaving the stench of his expensive cologne and the threat of eviction hanging in the air. The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. It pressed down on my chest, making it harder to breathe than when I was under anesthesia. I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the linoleum floor and rolled under the bed. I did not have the strength to retrieve it. I did not have the strength to do anything. A sharp, hot sensation spread across my abdomen. I pulled back the thin hospital blanket. A small, dark crimson flower was blooming on the white gauze bandage covering my incision. I was bleeding. It was a slow, steady seep, a physical manifestation of the wound that had just been inflicted on my soul. I stared at the blood. It was the same blood that now ran through Jason's body, the same blood that was filtering toxins from his system, keeping him alive, giving him the energy to destroy me. I had given him life twice, once when he was born and once 3 days ago, and this was his repayment. 32 years. I closed my eyes and the memories assaulted me. I saw the day he was born, red-faced and screaming. I saw the first time he rode a bike without training wheels, looking back at me with a grin that could light up the entire city of Chicago. I saw his graduation, his wedding, the moments I thought were the pillars of our bond. I had built my entire existence around protecting him. I had shielded him from failure. I had bought him out of trouble. I had paved his road with gold so he would never have to stumble on the rough stones of reality. I realized now with a clarity that was more painful than the scalpel that I had not raised a son. I had raised a parasite. I had cultivated a monster who viewed love as a transaction and family as a resource to be mined until it was empty. He did not see a father lying in this bed. He saw a liability. He saw an obstacle standing between him and the absolute power he craved. The grief that washed over me was not hot or passionate. It was cold. It was the freezing cold of a Chicago winter that settles into your bones and refuses to leave. I had lost my wife years ago, and that pain had been a sharp, jagged rock in my heart. But this was different. This was a hollow, bottomless pit. My son was not dead, but the person I thought he was had never existed. I had been loving a mirage. I reached for the call button, but my hand stopped mid-air. Why bother? Why call the nurse to change the bandage when the real hemorrhage was internal? I let my hand drop back onto the mattress. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor was the only thing proving I was still alive. Beep, beep, beep. Each sound was a mockery. You are alive. He is winning. You are alive. He is winning. I looked at the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the city in white. I felt small. I felt foolish. The great Richard Caldwell, titan of industry, reduced to a bleeding old man, waiting for security guards to drag him out of a hospital bed. I closed my eyes again, wishing the darkness would just take me. But the darkness did not come. Instead, the door handle turned. The door swung open, but it was not the security guard I had expected. It was Dr. Elena Ross. She walked in with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had spent 20 years in trauma units. She held a tablet in one hand and a stethoscope in the other. Her eyes went straight to the monitor before they even met mine. The rhythmic beeping had accelerated into a frantic tempo. She dropped the tablet on the side table and moved to my side in 2 strides. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice sharp and commanding. "You need to calm down. Your systolic pressure is 180/100. You are going to blow a vessel if you do not control your breathing." I tried to speak, but my throat was constricted by the lump of shame lodging there. I did not want her to see me like this. I did not want the brilliant surgeon who had performed a miracle on my body to see that my spirit had been butchered. She pulled back the blanket. She saw the red stain on the gauze. She swore softly under her breath. It was a curse word I did not expect from a Harvard graduate, but it felt appropriate. She pressed the call button for a nurse, but she did not wait for assistance. She began peeling back the tape herself, her hands gentle but firm. "Who did this?" she asked. She was not asking about the surgery. She was asking about the cause. She knew. Doctors always know when a patient's pain is not physical. I turned my head away, unable to meet her gaze. My eyes fell on the floor where the eviction notice lay. The bold letters seemed to mock me even from a distance. Notice of vacancy. Elena followed my gaze. She stopped working on the bandage. She reached down and picked up the paper. I tried to reach for it. "Don't," I whispered. "Please don't read that." She ignored me. She stood there in her white coat, reading the legal jargon that my son had used to destroy me. As she read, her expression changed. The clinical detachment vanished. Her jaw tightened. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the paper. The silence in the room shifted from the silence of despair to the silence of a gathering storm. She looked up at me. Her eyes were blazing. "He gave you this." She did not ask it as a question. She stated it as a fact. "He came in here 3 days after you gave him a kidney, and he gave you an eviction notice." I nodded slowly. The tears I had been holding back finally spilled over. "He says Brittany needs a yoga studio," I choked out. Elena crushed the paper in her hand. She threw it into the biohazard bin as if it were contaminated waste. "This is not a family dispute, Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice trembling with controlled rage. "This is medical sabotage. Recovery from a nephrectomy requires a stress-free environment. He is deliberately endangering your life." She leaned over the bed, her face inches from mine. "Does he know about the condition?" I looked at her confused. "What condition?" Elena straightened up. She adjusted her glasses. The shark was back. "I see. You didn't tell him, and clearly he didn't read the fine print of the consent forms." She walked to the door and locked it. "We need to talk, Mr. Caldwell, because your son just made a fatal miscalculation." Elena pulled the chair closer to my bedside, the metal legs scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. She lowered her voice, but the intensity in her eyes burned brighter than the fluorescent lights overhead. She told me that Jason had been so eager to get the surgery done, so eager to return to his life of cocktail parties and board meetings, that he had skipped the final consultation session. He had signed the consent forms without reading paragraph 4, section B. She explained that our tissue match was not perfect. In fact, it was a biological gamble. To prevent my 66-year-old kidney from being rejected by his 32-year-old system immediately, we had utilized a breakthrough treatment called the Chimera Protocol. It was not a simple pill you pick up at the pharmacy. It was a synthesized enzyme blocker injected biweekly, and it was strictly controlled. Without this medication, she said, leaning in closer, her voice a whisper of terrifying precision, his immune system will recognize the kidney as a foreign invader within 14 days. It will not be a slow decline, Richard. It will be a catastrophic system failure. And here is the part that your son, in his arrogance, missed. The insurance policy for this experimental drug is under your name. You are the primary sponsor. Every single dose requires your biometric authorization. I stared at her, letting the information sink in. The beeping of the monitor seemed to slow down, matching the sudden cold clarity settling in my chest. Jason thought he had stolen the engine of the car, but he had forgotten that I held the only key to the ignition. He had evicted the only person on Earth who could keep him alive. Elena reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. I am calling the hospital legal team, she said, her thumb hovering over the screen. We will file an emergency injunction. We will report the eviction as elder abuse and financial coercion. We can have the police at his door within the hour to strip him of that power of attorney. We can stop this, Richard. I reached out and placed my hand over hers. My grip was weak, but my intention was iron. No, I said. Elena looked at me surprised, her brow furrowed. Richard, he just threw you out on the street. He risked your life. You cannot protect him anymore. I am not protecting him, I replied, feeling a strange new strength rising in my veins. If we call the police now, he will play the victim. He will say it was a misunderstanding. He will settle out of court, and he will still have the house and the company. He will learn nothing. I took a deep breath, wincing as the stitches pulled tight. Let him have the victory, Elena. Let him move into the master bedroom. Let him throw my furniture into the dumpster. Let him feel safe. Let him believe he has won everything. I want him to sit on that throne for exactly 13 days. I want him to feel the power he was so desperate to steal. And then, when the first fever hits, when his body starts to turn against itself, I want him to realize that he built his castle on quicksand. Elena slowly lowered her phone. She studied my face, looking for the heartbroken father she had seen minutes ago. He was gone. In his place was the businessman who had crushed competitors for decades. You want to let him get sick? She asked quietly. I want him to understand the cost of betrayal, I said, closing my eyes. Do not authorize the next shipment of the medication. When his clinic calls, tell them there is a payment issue. Tell them the sponsor has withdrawn funding. But Richard, that could kill him. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. He is already dead, Elena. The son I loved died the moment he handed me that envelope. The man living in my house is a stranger, and strangers do not get free health care. I looked at the biohazard bin where the crumpled eviction notice lay. Do not call the police. Call my lawyer, Leonard. Tell him I am ready to rewrite the narrative, and tell the nurses to pack my bags. If my son wants me out of the house, I will leave, but I am taking his future with me. I signed the discharge papers against medical advice. Elena stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, warning me about the risk of infection and the danger of moving so soon after a major organ harvest. But staying in that hospital room felt more dangerous than any bacteria. The air was thick with the phantom presence of my son, and every time the door opened, I expected to see another legal notice. I needed to leave. I needed to see the extent of the damage with my own eyes. The taxi smelled of stale coffee and pine air freshener. It was a stark contrast to the leather interior of the Bentley that was currently parked in my garage, the keys likely already in Jason's pocket. I gave the driver the address. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, judging my pale skin and the hospital bracelet I had forgotten to cut off, but he didn't ask questions. Silence is the only luxury you can buy in a taxi. We drove north along the lake. The gray water chopped against the concrete barriers, matching the turbulence in my gut. As we approached Lake Forest, the houses grew larger, set back from the road, behind iron gates and manicured hedges. These were the monuments of Chicago's elite. I had built 3 of them myself. When we turned onto the private lane leading to number 1400, I told the driver to kill the engine. "Just stop here," I said. I did not want to go in. I did not want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me limp away. I just wanted to verify the reality. The wrought iron gates were wide open. A massive rusted dumpster sat in the middle of the circular driveway, an ugly scar on the pristine landscaping. And there she was. Brittany. She was wrapped in a white cashmere coat that cost more than this taxi driver made in a year. She was holding a cup of steaming coffee in one hand and pointing with the other. 2 men in blue coveralls were hauling a large object out the front door. My chest tightened, tearing at the internal stitches. It was my mahogany desk. The desk where I had sketched the skyline of this city. The desk where I had sat Jason on my knee and taught him how to read a blueprint. They didn't carry it. They dragged it. With a heave, they tossed it toward the dumpster. It struck the metal rim with a sickening crack and splintered one leg, hanging off like a broken limb. Brittany laughed. It wasn't a cruel laugh. It was light, airy, the sound of a woman burdening herself of clutter. To her, my life's work was just out-of-style furniture blocking her chai. Then I saw the pile on the wet pavement. My library. Hundreds of books, first editions, architectural journals, rare monographs I had collected over 40 years. They were stacked haphazardly in the slush. The melting snow was soaking into the leather bindings, ruining pages that contained centuries of knowledge. On top of the wet stack sat a silver frame. Even from 50 feet away, I recognized it. It was the photo of Jason and me fishing in Montana. The glass was shattered. "You want me to drive up there?" the driver asked, breaking my trance. "No," I said, my voice cold and steady. "I have seen enough." I watched Brittany take a sip of her coffee, completely unaware that she was being watched. She looked triumphant. She thought she was clearing out the past to make room for her future. She had no idea she was dismantling the only safety net she had. "Take me to Queens," I told the driver. He looked at me confused. "Queens. That is the other side of the city, pal. That is a long ride." I leaned back against the worn seat and closed my eyes, burning the image of that broken desk into my memory. "Drive," I said. "The meter is running, and so is the clock." The taxi ride to Queens took 40 minutes, and every bump in the road felt like a personal insult to my surgical wound. The driver dropped me off in front of a faded red brick building that stood in the shadow of the elevated train tracks. It was a neighborhood where people kept their heads down and mind their own business, which was exactly why I had chosen it. I stood on the cracked sidewalk, clutching the plastic bag containing my meager belongings, while the wind whipped around me. I looked up at the 4th-floor window. There were no manicured hedges here. There was no security gate. There was just the grit of the city and the anonymity I desperately needed. I bought this studio apartment 10 years ago. I paid cash using a shell company that did not appear on any family trust documents. At the time, I told myself it was an investment property, a place to store old architectural models. But standing there with the cold air biting at my face, I realized the truth. Deep down in my subconscious, I had always known this day would come. I had known that raising a son like Jason was like raising a tiger. Eventually, he would get hungry enough to eat the hand that fed him. This was not an investment. This was a bunker. The lobby smelled of bleach and old cooking oil. The elevator was broken, so I took the stairs. One step at a time. Grip the railing. Heave the body. Grit the teeth. By the time I reached Unit 4B, I was sweating profusely, and my vision was swimming with black spots. But I did not stop. I unlocked the door. The air inside was stale and heavy with dust. The studio was small, just a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom the size of a closet. The furniture was covered in white sheets, looking like ghosts in the dim light. I did not pull the curtains open. I did not want the sun. I wanted the darkness. I did not lie down to rest. I could not afford the luxury of sleep. I walked to the corner of the room where a cheap laminate desk sat gathering dust. I swept the surface clean with my sleeve. This was not going to be a home. It was going to be a war room. I knelt down and pulled up a loose floorboard in the closet. Underneath sat a fireproof lockbox. My hands trembled as I dialed the combination. It had been years since I opened it, but the numbers were etched into my memory. The lock clicked open. Inside was a black laptop and a series of hard drives. These were not family photos. These were the backups, the fail-safes, the digital skeletons of the Caldwell Empire. I placed the laptop on the desk and plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, casting a blue glow on my tired face. I connected to the internet using a secure, encrypted proxy. My fingers flew across the keyboard. Pain shot through my side with every movement, but I welcomed it. The pain focused me. I pulled up the schematics for the firm's central server. I pulled up the banking protocols. And finally, I pulled up the file labeled Phoenix. I stared at the blinking cursor. Jason thought he had taken my power when he took my house. He thought power was marble floors and expensive cars. He did not understand that true power was information, and I was the architect of his entire reality. I took a deep breath. I was not Richard the victim anymore. I was Richard the executioner. I cracked my knuckles and prepared to type the first command code. The war had officially begun. I reached into the bottom of the lockbox and pulled out a prepaid burner phone. I could not risk using my personal line, which was undoubtedly being monitored by Jason's new wife. I dialed a number that I had memorized 30 years ago. Leonard Katz did not believe in voicemail. He picked up on the second ring, his voice sounding like gravel being crushed in a mixer. Richard, where the hell are you? The hospital said you discharged yourself against medical advice. I have been calling your cell for 2 hours. I am about to file a missing persons report. I am safe, Leonard, I said, leaning back in the dusty chair. I am in the Queen's studio. The bunker. There was a pause on the other end. Leonard knew about the bunker. He was the one who set up the shell company to buy it. He let out a long breath that sounded like smoke escaping a chimney. Okay, good. At least you have a roof. Now listen to me, Richard. I am drafting the lawsuit right now. We are going to hit that ungrateful son of yours with everything. Elder abuse, fraud, emotional distress. I will have that eviction notice overturned by a judge before breakfast tomorrow. I will bury that boy under so much litigation he will need a submarine to find sunlight. No lawsuits, Leonard, I said calmly. Not yet. What do you mean, not yet? He threw you out. He stole your house. He thinks he stole it, I corrected him. But you and I both know what is really in those papers, don't we? Leonard fell silent. I could hear the gears turning in his brilliant legal mind. You mean the Phoenix writer? He asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. Exactly. I had never trusted Brittany. From the moment Jason brought her home 3 years ago, I saw the way she looked at the furniture, not with appreciation, but with calculation. She did not see a home. She saw an inventory list. She checked the hallmarks on the silver. She Googled the artists of the paintings on the walls. I knew that eventually she would whisper poison into Jason's ear. I just never thought my son would be so susceptible to the venom. So when Jason came to me with the transfer papers a month ago, claiming it was for tax efficiency, I signed them. But I insisted on using my own notary and my own addendum. It was buried on page 47 in a subclause regarding corporate governance and asset liquidity. Jason never reads the fine print, I said, staring at the laptop screen. He just looks for the signature line. He doesn't know that the transfer of authority is conditional. It is a revocable grant based on weekly biometric verification, Leonard recited from memory. I remember writing it. I told you it was paranoid at the time. I told you no son would ever do this to a father. God. I hate being wrong. You were optimistic, Leonard. I was realistic. The clause was simple but devastating. While Jason held the title to the house and the position of CEO, all operational funds and structural decisions required a weekly digital fingerprint scan from the primary grantor. Me. Without that scan, the accounts freeze, the credit lines lock, the house smart systems go into lockdown mode. He has the car, Leonard, but I have the keys and I just turned off the engine. I heard a low chuckle on the other end of the line. It was a dark, vicious sound. So, what is the play, Richard? Execute the protocol. I said, my finger hovering over the enter key on my laptop. Initiate the Phoenix lockdown. I want every credit card in his wallet to decline. I want the company accounts to flag his access as unauthorized. And Leonard, send a notification to the board of directors. Tell them the new CEO is under investigation for financial misappropriation. You are going to starve him out, Leonard said. I am going to teach him a lesson about ownership, I replied. He wanted to be the man of the house. Let us see how he handles the bills when Daddy stops paying them. I pressed the enter key. A progress bar appeared on the screen loading the lockdown code. Do it, Leonard said. And Richard, welcome back to the game. I propped the iPad against a stack of yellowing blueprints on the dusty desk. The screen was the only source of light in the room, casting a harsh blue glow on the peeling paint of the studio walls. I logged into a dummy Instagram account I had created years ago to monitor competitor marketing trends. I navigated to Brittany's profile. The live ring around her profile picture was pulsing. She had titled the stream New Beginnings at the Lake House. I tapped the screen. The silence of my bunker was instantly broken by the thumping bass of house music and the shrill laughter of strangers. The camera was shaky, moving through the grand hall I had designed to capture the sunset. Now it was filled with people I did not recognize. They were drinking my wine. They were walking on my Persian rugs with their muddy shoes. Brittany was holding the camera, turning it into selfie mode. She was wearing a silver dress that shimmered under the chandelier. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had just won the lottery. Hey guys, she shouted over the music. Welcome to the housewarming. We are finally settling in. The vibe is so much better now that we have cleared out the old energy. She panned the camera to Jason. My son was standing by the fireplace holding a bottle of my 1996 Dom Perignon. He looked flushed, his tie loosened, a king holding court in a castle he did not build. He saw the camera and raised the bottle. To the new era, he roared. I watched the comments roll in on the side of the screen. Someone named at Chicago Socialite asked, "Where is Richard?" Jason saw the comment. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned tighter and more practiced. Dad is taking a little vacation, Jason said, leaning into the camera lens. He tapped his temple with his index finger. He has been getting a little confused lately. You know how it is with age. The surgery took a lot out of him mentally. We decided it was best to put him in a facility where he can get the 24-hour care he needs. It is safer for everyone. Brittany nodded, putting on a sad, sympathetic face. Yeah, it was really hard for us, she added. But honestly, he was becoming impossible to live with. He was forgetting things. He was getting aggressive. We had to prioritize our safety and our mental health. We are just sending him love and light. I sat there in the dark, my hand resting on the cold laminate of the desk. Aggressive, confused, impossible. They were not just stealing my property. They were dismantling my legacy. They were painting a narrative of senility to discredit me before I could even fight back. They needed the world to believe I was a broken old man so that when I spoke, no one would listen. Jason laughed at something someone said in the room and poured more champagne onto the floor, a wasteful offering to his own ego. "This house is finally ours," he shouted. "No more rules, no more looking over our shoulder." I looked at the time on the laptop screen next to the iPad. It was 11:59 p.m. The weekly cycle for the Phoenix Protocol was set to reset at midnight. "Enjoy the champagne, Jason," I said to the empty room. "Drink it all. Because tomorrow you won't even be able to afford the water from the tap." They were dancing on a trapdoor. They were celebrating their independence while standing on a rug that I was about to pull out from under them. I watched them for one more minute, memorizing every smile, every insult, every lie. I needed this anger. It was the fuel that would power what came next. I minimized the live stream window. I opened the command terminal on my laptop. The cursor blinked, waiting for my order. "You want to say I am confused, Jason? Let me show you exactly how sharp my memory is." I typed the execute command. The cursor on the black screen blinked with a steady, rhythmic pulse waiting for my command. It was the only light in the room, a small beacon of control in a world that had spiraled into chaos. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. They were trembling slightly, not from hesitation, but from the phantom pain in my side where my kidney used to be. I took a deep breath, inhaling the stale air of the studio apartment, and let it out slowly. I typed the command string. PHOENIX_OVERRIDE. It was not just a password. It was a fail-safe protocol I had written into the company bylaws 10 years ago. It was designed for a worst-case scenario, a hostile takeover, or a catastrophic leadership failure. I never imagined the hostile force would be my own flesh and blood. I never imagined the failure would be a moral one. I pressed the enter key. The sound was sharp, loud in the quiet room. On the screen, lines of code began to cascade like a digital waterfall. Green text scrolled rapidly, executing the subroutines I had buried deep within the server architecture of Caldwell & Sons. I imagined the signals traveling through the fiber optic cables under the East River, racing toward the skyscraper in downtown Chicago that bore my name. I pictured the server room on the 45th floor. I had designed that room myself, ensuring it had independent cooling and backup power. I knew its heart better than I knew my own son. The laptop hummed as it established a handshake with the mainframe. A dialog box popped up. "Override authorized. Biometric scan required." I placed my thumb on the scanner attached to the USB port. A beam of red light swept across my print. Identity confirmed. "Welcome, Chairman Caldwell." I did not smile. This was not a victory. It was an amputation. I navigated to the user management console. There at the top of the list was Jason Caldwell, listed as Chief Executive Officer with full administrative privileges. His status was active. Next to his name was a log of his recent activities. He had approved a $200,000 renovation for his new office. He had transferred $50,000 to a travel agency for a trip to the Maldives. He was spending company money like water. I highlighted his name. My finger moved to the suspend button. "I am sorry, Jason," I whispered to the empty room, "but you cannot fly the plane if you throw the pilot out of the cockpit." I clicked. The screen froze for a microsecond, then refreshed. The status next to Jason's name changed from active to suspended. The text turned from green to red. A cascade of secondary windows opened, confirming that his company email had been locked, his digital signature had been invalidated, and his access to the corporate banking portal had been revoked. I opened the live system log. I wanted to see the exact moment the blade fell. At 12:01 a.m., the server rejected a request from Jason's iPad to access the client database. At 12:02 a.m., an automatic scheduled transfer to his personal expense account was blocked. At 12:03 a.m., the security system at the office flagged his keycard as lost or stolen. He was still at the party, probably raising a glass of my vintage champagne. He had no idea that digitally he had just ceased to exist. The credit card in his pocket was now just a piece of plastic. The phone in his hand was about to lose its service plan. He was a king without a kingdom, and he wouldn't even know it until the sun came up. I sat back in the creaky chair and watched the red text dominate the screen. The phoenix had risen, and it was hungry. The sun rose over Chicago the next morning, but for the new CEO of Caldwell & Sons, it was the beginning of a very long night. I sat in my studio apartment, sipping black coffee and watching the remote administrative logs on my laptop. I did not need a camera to see what was happening. The server data told the story better than any video feed. At 8:45 a.m., the proximity sensor in the main lobby of the Caldwell Tower triggered. That was Jason. He was 45 minutes late, likely nursing a champagne hangover from his victory party. I imagined him striding across the marble floor, wearing his Italian suit and the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. He would nod dismissively at the security guard, old Jerry, who had worked for me for 20 years. He would approach the private executive elevator, the one that required a biometric keycard to open. The log showed a card swipe at 8:46 a.m. Access denied. The log showed a second swipe 3 seconds later. Access denied. Then a third. This one was followed by a manual override attempt. Access denied. Account suspended. I could almost hear him cursing. He probably blamed the plastic. He probably yelled at Jerry to open the gate manually, claiming there was a magnetic glitch. Jerry, being the loyal employee, would have hesitated. The screen showed a manual override from the security desk 2 minutes later. Jason had bullied his way into the building. He was physically inside, but he was about to discover that the building was just a shell. The brain of the company was already dead to him. He reached his office on the 45th floor. The network activity spiked. He was trying to log into his terminal. User unknown. Password invalid. He tried again, and again. The system locked him out completely after 3 failed attempts, enforcing a 24-hour cooldown period. Then the phone lines began to light up on my dashboard. The voice-over IP system logged incoming calls from our top-tier clients. At 9:15 a.m., the red light for the Sterling project blinked. That was a $50 million mixed-use development in the Gold Coast. It was the crown jewel of Jason's portfolio, the project that was supposed to prove he was better than me. I tapped into the audio stream. I did not speak. I just listened. Mr. Caldwell. Where is my crew? It was Marcus Sterling, and he was screaming. I was supposed to have cranes on site at 6 a.m. The foreman tells me the work order was canceled due to non-payment. We have a contract. If those machines are not moving in an hour, I am pulling the plug, and I am suing you for breach of contract. I heard Jason's voice. It was high-pitched, shaky. Mr. Sterling, please calm down. It is just a banking glitch. We switched payroll providers last night. I am wiring the funds right now. I am looking at the screen. He was lying. He was looking at a black screen that simply said, Phoenix Protocol active. I will fix this, Jason stammered. Just give me 10 minutes. You have 5, Marcus barked and slammed the phone down. I watched the data stream as Jason frantically tried to access the emergency liquidity fund. That account usually held $2 million in cash for situations exactly like this. Transaction declined. Authorization required Richard Caldwell. He tried the corporate credit card next. Declined. He tried the offshore reserve. Declined. He was standing in the middle of a multi-million-dollar enterprise surrounded by award-winning designs and expensive furniture, but he did not have enough purchasing power to buy a sandwich from the vending machine. The empire he had stolen was shutting down around him room by room, dollar by dollar, and the silence in his office was about to be broken by the sound of his own panic. The notification on my laptop screen blinked red. Incoming call blocked. Source: Jason Mobile. It blinked again, and again. 5 times in the span of 2 minutes. He was frantic. For 32 years, whenever Jason faced a hurdle, he called his father. If he crashed his car, he called me. If he needed tuition, he called me. I had conditioned him to view me as the ultimate safety net, the man who could fix anything with a checkbook or a phone call. Now, for the first time in his life, he was free falling, and the net was gone. I sat in the dim light of my Queens apartment, watching the security feed from the executive suite. The camera angle was wide, capturing the entire office in high definition, black and white. Jason was pacing back and forth in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. He looked small against the backdrop of the city I had helped build. He loosened his tie, tearing at the knot, as if it were choking him. He threw his phone onto the leather sofa. He ran his hands through his hair, gripping his scalp in a gesture of pure desperation. This was the moment. This was the crossroads. If he had been alone in that room, I believe he might have broken. He might have let the weight of his actions crush his ego. He might have realized that he had bitten the hand that fed him, and he might have come looking for me not to fight, but to beg. But he was not alone. The door to the office swung open, and Brittany marched in. She was still wearing that pristine white coat, looking like an ice queen surveying her domain. She did not look worried. She looked annoyed. She saw her husband crumbling, and she despised the weakness. She did not go to him to offer comfort. She did not hug him. She walked straight to the wet bar, poured a glass of water, and slammed it down on the desk. She said something to him. I could not hear the audio, but I could read the body language perfectly. She was shouting. She pointed at the phone, then at him. She was not telling him to apologize. She was not telling him to make things right. She was the accelerant in this fire. She was telling him to fix it. Jason slumped into my chair, burying his face in his hands. He looked like he was explaining that the money was gone, that the accounts were frozen. Brittany walked around the desk. She grabbed his shoulders and shook him. She leaned down, her face inches from his. I could imagine the poison she was whispering. She was telling him that I was senile, that I was vindictive, that he was the CEO, and I was just a bitter old man trying to sabotage his success. Don't you dare call him back, she seemed to say. Don't you dare apologize. That is what he wants. He wants you to crawl. Are you going to crawl, Jason, or are you going to take what is yours? I saw the transformation happen in real time. I saw Jason's spine straighten. I saw the guilt evaporate from his face, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. He looked up at her and nodded. He wiped his face. He was not going to ask for forgiveness. He was going to escalate. Brittany smiled. It was a sharp, predatory smile. She had successfully turned his panic into rage. She had convinced him that defending his theft was a righteous cause. Jason reached for the landline on the desk. He did not dial the bank. He did not dial the board of directors. He dialed a number from memory. He spoke for less than a minute, his face grim and determined. When he hung up, Brittany kissed him on the cheek. It was a reward for his obedience. I sat back in my creaky chair, feeling a deep, profound sadness. I had hoped the financial shock would wake him up. Instead, it had pushed him further into her web. They were not backing down. They were doubling down. I did not know who he had called, but I knew the game had just changed. They were done playing with lawyers. They were about to get dirty. I checked the locks on my apartment door. I had a feeling I wouldn't be safe in the shadows much longer. The next 72 hours were a blur of legal maneuvering and tactical silence. I stayed in my Queen's bunker, ignoring the hundreds of missed calls from Jason. He was desperate. I could see it in the frantic login attempts on the server logs. He tried to access the offshore accounts. He tried to liquefy the real estate holdings. He even tried to sell the company jet. But every door he pushed was locked tight by the Phoenix Protocol. Then on Tuesday morning, the courier arrived. He slid a thick envelope under my apartment door. It wasn't a standard letter. It was a court summons. I picked it up, my hands steady despite the exhaustion gnawing at my bones. I tore it open. The title of the motion was printed in bold, accusatory letters, Petition for Emergency. Guardianship due to incapacity. I read the filing. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Jason, under the guidance of whatever shark lawyer Brittany had found, was claiming that the surgery had caused severe cognitive decline. They cited my erratic behavior in the hospital, refusing to leave, making threats against family members, and finally disappearing against medical advice. They claimed I was a danger to myself and others. But the real kicker was paragraph 6. The petitioner, Jason Caldwell, seeks immediate control over all remaining assets, specifically the Richard Caldwell Retirement Trust, to ensure the respondent receives adequate medical care in a specialized facility. He wasn't just trying to get the company back. He was coming for my nest egg. He was coming for the money I had set aside to live out my final years in peace. And he was using my mental health as the weapon to do it. I dialed Leonard immediately. "You saw it?" Leonard asked before I could even say hello. "I'm reading it now," I said, my voice cold. "He's trying to have me declared incompetent." "It's a standard move for a desperate man, Richard," Leonard replied. "He knows he can't break your encryption, so he's trying to break you legally. If the judge grants this guardianship, Jason gets power of attorney over everything. The Phoenix Protocol won't matter, because he'll legally be you." "What are the chances?" I asked, without a counter-argument high. "He has affidavits from the hospital staff saying you were agitated. He has photos of your apartment looking abandoned because of the way he staged it. He's painting a picture of a man losing his mind, Richard. And in the state of Illinois, courts tend to side with the concerned child when the parent is absent." "I'm not absent," I said, looking at the date of the hearing. It was tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. An emergency docket. "I'll be there." "Richard, are you sure?" Leonard's voice was filled with concern. "You're still recovering. Walking into that courtroom, it's going to be brutal. They're going to attack your character, your sanity, everything." "Let them try," I said, closing the folder. "He thinks I'm a senile old man hiding in a hole. He has no idea I'm the one holding the shovel." I hung up. I looked at myself in the cracked mirror of the bathroom. I looked tired. I looked pale. But in my eyes I saw the same fire that had built skyscrapers. Jason wanted a show. I would give him a performance he would never forget. I reached for my suit, the one I had worn to ring the opening bell at the stock exchange 10 years ago. It still fit. Tomorrow I wouldn't just be defending my sanity. I would be prosecuting his soul. I sat in the glow of the monitor in my Queen's bunker and opened the security interface for the lake house. The summons in my hand was just paper, but I knew they would need physical evidence to back up their claims of my insanity. They needed to show a judge that I was a danger to myself. I wondered how they planned to do that, given that I was miles away. Then I saw the answer on the screen labeled Master Bedroom Feed. Brittany walked into the frame. She was struggling with the weight of a cardboard box. She dumped it upside down onto the pristine Persian rug I had bought in Istanbul 20 years ago. Clattering out were dozens of empty liquor bottles, cheap vodka, plastic handles of gin, rotgut whiskey that I would not have used to clean my paintbrushes, let alone drink. She began to kick them around the room, scattering them like props on a stage. She tipped over the nightstand, sending my reading lamp crashing to the floor. She pulled the sheets off the mattress and threw them in a heap in the corner. Then she called Jason. He walked into the room wearing his pajamas, looking tired and malleable. She handed him a bottle and positioned him in the center of the chaos. She pulled out her phone. Flash, flash, flash. She was directing him like a model in a photo shoot. Look sadder, Jason. Look overwhelmed. Put your head in your hands. I watched in silence as my son posed amidst the fake wreckage of his father's life. They were manufacturing a scene of alcoholism and dementia. They were creating a visual narrative to present to the court tomorrow morning. Look, Your Honor. Look at how he was living. We had to intervene. We had to take control. It was a brilliant strategy if you assumed the cameras were turned off. But Jason had forgotten that I designed the security system myself. The red recording light on the camera was taped over, but the lens was wide open. Every movement, every staged bottle, every directive from Brittany was being captured in high definition and uploaded directly to my secure cloud server. They finished their photo shoot with a high five. Brittany looked proud of her set design. She surveyed the mess of the room that used to be my sanctuary and smiled the smile of a predator who thinks the trap is sprung. I did not feel anger anymore. I felt the cold, clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing to cut. I downloaded the footage. I saved it to 3 different hard drives. I named the file Exhibit A. They were going to walk into court tomorrow with photographs. I was going to walk in with a movie. They wanted to prove I was incompetent. Instead, they were about to provide the most damning evidence of their own moral bankruptcy. I closed the laptop and laid out my suit for the morning. It was going to be a very interesting day in court. The air in the Cook County Courthouse always smelled the same. It was a mixture of old wood polish, stale coffee, and the sweat of desperate people hoping for a miracle. I walked through the heavy oak doors of courtroom 302 with Leonard by my side. I kept my chin high and my back straight, ignoring the sharp pull of the stitches in my side. I was wearing my charcoal gray suit, the one I reserved for board meetings and hostile takeovers. I was not here to be pitied. I was here to be feared. Jason and Brittany were already seated at the plaintiff's table. They had clearly been coached by an expert. Jason was not wearing his usual Italian silk. He was wearing a modest navy blazer and a simple tie. He looked tired. He had dark circles under his eyes that I suspected were makeup rather than exhaustion. Brittany was wearing a high-necked black dress and a string of pearls. She looked like a grieving widow clutching a handkerchief, as if she expected to burst into tears at any moment. They were playing their parts perfectly. The devoted son and daughter-in-law forced to make the heartbreaking decision to incapacitate the patriarch for his own good. The judge entered. The Honorable Judge Reynolds. He was a stern man with a reputation for efficiency. He looked over his glasses at me, then at Jason. He did not smile. All rise, the bailiff announced. We sat. The silence that followed was heavy electric. Jason's lawyer stood up. He was a man named Mr. Crow, a shark I had seen tear apart families in the society pages for years. He smoothed his jacket and approached the bench with a solemn expression. Your Honor, he began, his voice dripping with faux sincerity. We are not here today out of greed or malice. We are here out of love. The petitioner, Mr. Jason Caldwell, has been forced to take this drastic step to protect his father from himself. He turned to point a finger at me. It was not an accusation. It was a gesture of pity. Mr. Richard Caldwell is a legend in this city. He built a skyline. But the man sitting before you today is not that titan of industry. He is a man in severe cognitive decline, exacerbated by the trauma of a major surgery. 3 days ago, he fled Northwestern Memorial Hospital against medical advice, ripping out his own IVs. He disappeared into the night, refusing contact with his worried family. Crow walked back to his table and picked up a stack of photos. We have evidence, Your Honor, that Mr. Caldwell is living in squalor in a derelict apartment in Queens. We have evidence of extreme paranoia. He has locked his own son out of the family business, damaging the company's reputation and financial standing in a fit of delusion. He believes his family is plotting against him. This is a classic symptom of post-operative psychosis. I watched Jason. He had his head bowed. He was shaking slightly, as if he were weeping. It was a masterful performance. If I didn't know him, I would have believed him. Crow continued, his voice rising. We are asking the court to grant immediate emergency guardianship to Jason Caldwell. We are asking for control of the Richard Caldwell Retirement Trust so that we can place Mr. Caldwell in a facility where he can receive the 24-hour psychiatric care he so clearly needs. We cannot let this great man destroy his legacy and his life in a moment of madness. I felt Leonard's hand on my arm. He was telling me to stay calm. I didn't need the reminder. I wasn't angry anymore. I was impressed. They had built a beautiful cage for me. They just didn't realize that the lion they were trying to trap was already standing behind them. The courtroom was silent as I made my way to the witness stand. I did not need a cane. I did not stumble. I walked with the measured, deliberate pace of a man who had spent 40 years navigating construction sites and boardrooms. I placed my hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth. Mr. Crow approached me like a hunter cornering wounded prey. He smiled a tight, patronizing expression designed to unsettle me. Mr. Caldwell, he began, his voice soft. Can you tell the court where you slept last night? I slept in an apartment I own in Queens, I replied, my voice steady and clear. It is a quiet neighborhood, very conducive to recovery. And why did you feel the need to flee to this apartment immediately after surgery? Were you afraid? Were you confused? I looked him in the eye. I was evicted, Mr. Crow, by the petitioner, my son. Crow waved a hand dismissively. We have already established that was a misunderstanding regarding your care. But let us talk about your mental state. Is it true that you locked your son out of his own company yesterday? Is it true that you froze assets vital to the operation of a multi-million-dollar business? Do you understand the damage you are causing? I leaned forward slightly. The microphone picked up the rustle of my suit jacket. I understand perfectly, I said. I did not lock him out because I was confused. I locked him out because he was stealing. Crow paused. He looked at the judge, feigning shock. Stealing. That is a serious accusation, Mr. Caldwell. Do you have proof, or is this another paranoid delusion? I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket. I pulled out a flash drive. I held it up for the court to see. This drive contains the forensic accounting logs from the past 48 hours, I stated. Since taking control of the company, my son has attempted to transfer $200,000 to a personal offshore account. He has billed the company for a $50,000 vacation. And he has attempted to leverage company assets to secure a personal loan to cover gambling debts he incurred last year in Vegas. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, the Phoenix Protocol is not a weapon of a madman. It is a corporate governance failsafe designed to prevent exactly this kind of embezzlement. I am not senile. I am protecting my shareholders. I am protecting my legacy from a CEO who treats a public company like his personal piggy bank. Jason jumped up from his seat. That is a lie. He is lying. Sit down, Mr. Caldwell, Judge Reynolds barked, banging his gavel. I continued, my voice calm but cutting through the noise like a knife. I may be old, Mr. Crow. I may be recovering from surgery, but I can still read a balance sheet. And the only thing declining in this family is my son's moral compass. I looked at Jason. He was pale. He had not expected me to bring the numbers. He thought this was about feelings. He forgot that in business, numbers are the only language that matters. Crow looked flustered. He shuffled his papers, looking for a way to regain control. But the damage was done. The narrative of the helpless, confused old man had just been shattered by the cold, hard facts of forensic accounting. The courtroom buzzed with the low hum of whispered conversations following my testimony regarding the finances. Mr. Crow looked like a boxer who had just taken a heavy blow to the liver. He was leaning against the table, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. He tried to rally. He tried to argue that my access to the servers was proof of my obsession, not my competence. He tried to paint me as a vindictive genius, a man whose intellect was intact, but whose morality had fractured. "Your Honor," he stammered, "the respondent is clearly capable of using a computer, but that does not prove he is emotionally stable enough to care for himself. We have reports from the hospital nursing staff indicating severe agitation." Leonard Katz stood up. He did not shout. He did not pound the table. He simply buttoned his jacket and spoke with the quiet confidence of a man holding a royal flush. "The defense calls Dr. Elena Ross to the stand." The color drained from Jason's face. He knew Elena. He knew her as the woman who had saved his life 3 days ago, but he also knew her as the woman who had kicked him out of my hospital room. He whispered something frantically to Brittany, who was chewing on her lower lip, her eyes darting between me and the doors. The double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Dr. Elena Ross walked down the center aisle. She was not wearing her white coat today. She was wearing a sharp, tailored suit that commanded as much authority as any judge's robe. She carried a thick medical file under her arm. She did not look at Jason. She did not look at Brittany. She walked straight to the witness box, took the oath, and sat down. Dr. Ross Leonard began. "Can you please state your title and your relationship to the respondent?" "I am the Chief of Transplant Surgery at Northwestern Memorial Hospital." Elena stated, her voice clear and precise. "I was the lead surgeon for Mr. Caldwell's nephrectomy, and I have been his primary care physician for the past 5 years. And in your professional medical opinion," Leonard asked, "is Richard Caldwell suffering from post-operative psychosis or dementia?" Elena opened the file in front of her. She adjusted her glasses and looked directly at Judge Reynolds. "Absolutely not." Mr. Crow jumped up. "Objection. The witness is a surgeon, not a psychiatrist." "Overruled," Judge Reynolds said, leaning forward. "I want to hear this." Elena continued unfazed. "While I am a surgeon, I am also board-certified in internal medicine and patient advocacy. Mr. Caldwell underwent a full cognitive evaluation 6 hours before he discharged himself. I administered it myself because I was concerned about the stress levels caused by his visitors." She pulled a document from the folder and held it up. "This is the mini mental state examination. A score of 24 or higher indicates normal cognition. Mr. Caldwell scored a 30, a perfect score. He was oriented to time, place, and person. His short-term memory was intact. His reasoning skills were functioning at a higher level than most people half his age." She turned to look at Jason. Her gaze was withering. "Mr. Crow mentioned agitation." Yes, Mr. Caldwell was agitated. His heart rate was elevated. His cortisol levels were high. But that is not a symptom of psychosis. That is a physiological response to extreme emotional trauma. If a man wakes up from surgery to find his son evicting him from his home, anger is not a symptom of mental illness. It is a symptom of sanity. A crazy man would have signed the papers. A sane man protects himself. The courtroom was dead silent. Crow sank back into his chair. His narrative of the confused old man was dissolving into dust, but Elena was not finished. She turned a page in her file. Furthermore, she added, "I have the toxicology report from the day of his discharge. There were no hallucinogens in his system, only the standard post-operative painkillers which were well within the therapeutic range. Richard Caldwell left my hospital because it was the only logical way to escape a hostile environment. He is not the one who needs a guardian. Your Honor, he is the only adult in this room." Elena was not finished. She turned the page of the medical file with a sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. She looked at Jason, who was now sitting on the edge of his seat, beads of sweat breaking through the heavy layer of makeup on his forehead. He knew something was coming, but he had no idea just how deep the knife was about to go. There is one more thing. Your Honor, Elena said, her voice dropping an octave, becoming grave and serious. The court needs to understand the biological reality of this transplant. This was not a standard procedure. Mr. Jason Caldwell suffers from a rare genetic mutation called the polymorphic antigen variants. It is the reason his kidneys failed at such a young age, and it is the reason his body is naturally hostile to any foreign tissue. She held up a chart filled with red spikes and complex data lines. To suppress this aggressive immune response, we had to put Jason on a very specific, very experimental post-operative regimen. It involves a proprietary biologic drug called cyclovir. It is the only thing standing between him and total organ rejection. Crow stood up, looking confused. Relevance, Your Honor. This is a guardianship hearing, not a medical seminar. It is entirely relevant, Elena shot back, silencing him with a glare. Because cyclovir is not FDA approved for general use yet. It is not covered by Medicare, Medicaid, or standard private insurance. It costs $50,000 for a 30-day supply. And because it is classified as an investigational treatment, it requires a specific private sponsor to accept financial and legal liability. She turned to look at me. Her eyes were soft for a moment, before turning back to the judge, hardening into steel. The sponsor for this treatment is Richard Caldwell. The insurance rider that pays for this $50,000 a month lifeline is attached specifically to the chairman's executive compensation package at Caldwell & Sons. It is a discretionary benefit. Elena paused for effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. Here is the problem, Your Honor. The policy dictates that every single refill authorization requires the biometric digital signature of the primary policyholder. That signature must be renewed every 30 days. If the policyholder is declared incompetent, or if the policyholder simply refuses to sign, the insurance company cancels the coverage immediately. I watched Jason. The blood had drained from his face so completely, he looked like a wax figure. He looked at Brittany. She was frantically whispering to her lawyer, but for the first time the lawyer looked terrified. He stopped writing. He realized he had walked into a trap. So Elena concluded, closing the file with a finality that sounded like a prison door slamming shut. If you grant this guardianship to Jason, you are effectively killing him. If you declare Richard incompetent, the signature becomes void, the funding stops, and the organ rejection begins within 48 hours. The only person keeping Jason Caldwell alive right now is the very man he is trying to destroy. Judge Reynolds took off his glasses. He looked at Jason with a mixture of disbelief and disgust. Is this true, Mr. Crow? The judge asked. Did your client not know that his own survival was tied to his father's agency? Crow stammered, shuffling papers that suddenly seemed useless. We were not aware of the specific terms of the insurance rider, Your Honor. Then you are incompetent, the judge snapped. I sat back in the witness chair and crossed my legs. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply looked at my son. He was staring at me, his eyes wide with the realization of his monumental stupidity. He had tried to cut off the head of the king, forgetting that the king held the antidote to the poison in his veins. The courtroom shifted. The power was no longer at the plaintiff's table. It was right here with me. Judge Reynolds stared at the plaintiff's table for a long, uncomfortable minute. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Mr. Crow, the shark who had been so confident an hour ago, was now frantically shoving papers into his briefcase, trying to make himself invisible. But there was nowhere to hide. The judge leaned into his microphone. His voice did not boom. It did not shout. It was a low rumble of absolute authority that echoed off the mahogany walls. Mr. Crow, the judge, began, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. In my 20 years on the bench, I have seen greed. I have seen betrayal. I have seen families tear each other apart for a few dollars. But I have never seen a case of such transparent, malicious manipulation. You brought a man into my courtroom, A man who gave a piece of his own body to save his son, and you tried to paint him as a lunatic to facilitate a hostile corporate takeover. Crow tried to speak. Your Honor, I was merely acting on my client's instructions. Be quiet, Reynolds snapped. You are an officer of the court. You have a duty to verify the facts, not just parrot the lies of a desperate man. Consider this a formal warning on your record. If you ever bring a frivolous petition like this before me again, I will personally report you to the Bar Association for disbarment. The judge turned his gaze to Jason. My son shrank in his seat. He looked like a child who had broken a priceless vase and was waiting for the strap. As for you, Mr. Jason Caldwell, the judge continued, his voice dripping with disdain. Your petition for emergency guardianship is denied, dismissed with prejudice. That means you cannot file it again. You cannot shop this lie to another judge. And frankly, if your father decides to countersue you for defamation and abuse of process, I will be the first to sign the warrant. Reynolds raised his gavel. Get out of my courtroom. The gavel struck the sound block. Bang! The sound was final. It was the sound of a guillotine blade dropping. The court was adjourned. People began to stand, gathering their coats, whispering excitedly about the drama they had just witnessed. But Jason did not move. He sat frozen in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard his knuckles were white. He was not thinking about the legal defeat. He was thinking about the biology. Dr. Ross's words were replaying in his mind on a loop. Biometric signature. Rejection. 48 hours. Slowly, painfully, he turned his head to look at me. Brittany was tugging at his sleeve, whispering something urgent, probably telling him to appeal, to fight, to do something. He ignored her. He looked at me across the aisle. For the first time in his life, he saw me. He didn't see a bank account. He didn't see a stepping stone. He saw the man who held the remote control to his immune system. His eyes traveled down to my right hand, resting calmly on the railing of the witness box. He stared at my thumb, the thumb that needed to press a scanner to authorize the shipment of the drug that kept him alive. I saw the terror bloom in his eyes. It was raw, primal fear. He realized that he had just tried to bury the only person on earth who could keep him out of the grave. I stood up and buttoned my jacket. I did not smile at him. I did not frown. I gave him the same look I used to give him when he failed a math test in high school. A look of profound disappointment. I turned to Leonard. Let's go get lunch, Leonard, I said, my voice loud enough for Jason to hear. I have a sudden appetite. I walked past Jason without breaking stride. I could hear his rapid, shallow breathing. He wanted to call out. He wanted to say, Dad. But the words stuck in his throat, choked off by the weight of his own betrayal. He was a dead man, walking, and he had just spent the morning insulting the executioner. I stood by the heavy brass revolving doors of the Daily Center and watched the aftermath of my victory. I did not leave immediately. I wanted to see him. I wanted to see the moment the reality of his mortality truly settled in. It is a cruel thing for a father to witness the suffering of his son. But Jason had burned the bridge of fatherhood to ash. Now we were just two men on opposite sides of a survival equation. Jason walked out of the courtroom with the gait of a man walking to the gallows. Brittany was a few steps ahead of him, tapping furiously on her phone, likely trying to liquidate whatever assets she could before the freeze I had initiated took full effect. She did not look back at him. She did not offer a hand to hold. Dr. Elena Ross stepped into Jason's path. She did not look like his doctor anymore. She looked like a judge delivering a sentence that no court could overturn. She blocked his way to the exit, forcing him to stop in the middle of the busy lobby. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. I need to make sure you understand the timeline. The judge dismissed your petition, but biology does not care about legal motions. Jason looked at her, his eyes hollow. What do you want, Elena? He muttered. I lost. Are you happy? I am not happy, she replied, cold and professional. I am obligated to inform you that your last dose of Cyclo-V was administered 3 days ago. The half-life of the drug is exactly 17 days. That means you have 14 days left. Jason blinked. 14 days. 2 weeks, Jason, she continued relentlessly. 2 weeks before the antibodies in your blood wake up and realize that the kidney inside you does not belong there. It starts with a fever, then the tremors, then your urine will turn dark like cola. It is agonizing, Jason. It feels like burning from the inside out. And once the rejection cascade begins, it is very difficult to reverse. I saw the color drain from his face completely. He swayed on his feet. He reached out to grab a marble pillar for support, but his hand slipped. He crumbled. He did not fall gracefully. He collapsed into a heap on the cold terrazzo floor right there in the lobby of the courthouse. He pulled his knees to his chest, gasping for air. It was not a panic attack. It was the crushing weight of the truth. He had millions of dollars in potential equity. He had a beautiful wife. He had a prestigious title. But without my signature on a medical authorization form, he was a dead man walking. Brittany stopped and turned around. She looked down at her husband writhing on the floor. She did not kneel to help him. She looked embarrassed. "Get up, Jason," she hissed, looking around to see if anyone was filming. "You are making a scene." "I cannot breathe," Jason gasped, clutching his chest. "I am going to die." "You are not going to die," she snapped. "We will find another doctor. We will buy the drug on the black market. Just get up." Elena shook her head. "There is no black market for this drug, Mrs. Caldwell. It is strictly controlled, and no other doctor will touch him without the primary sponsor's approval. That is the law." I watched from the shadows. I saw my son looked up across the lobby. He found me. His eyes were wide, filled with terror and tears. He mouthed the word, "Dad." I turned my back on him. I pushed through the revolving door and walked out into the cold Chicago wind. He had 14 days to think about what he had done, and I was going to let him count every single second. The drive back from the courthouse was silent, but it was the silence of a bomb waiting to detonate. Jason was curled up in the passenger seat of the Range Rover, clutching his stomach. The physical symptoms of rejection had not actually started yet, but fear is a potent pathogen. He was sweating, shivering, and muttering to himself. He looked like a child who had woken up from a nightmare only to realize the monster was real, and it was sitting in the driver's seat. Brittany did not look at him. She stared straight ahead, her knuckles white on the leather steering wheel. Her jaw was set so tight, I could practically hear her teeth grinding. She was not worried about her husband dying. She was worried about losing. To Brittany, life was a zero-sum game. If Richard won, she lost. And Brittany hated losing more than she loved anything else, including the man beside her. "I have to call him Jason," stammered his voice cracking. "I have to apologize. Maybe if I give the house back, he will sign the authorization. Elena said I have 14 days. Brittany slammed on the brakes, pulling the massive SUV over to the shoulder of the highway. Cars whizzed past, shaking the frame of the vehicle. She turned to Jason, and her eyes were not the eyes of a wife. They were the eyes of a loan shark collecting a debt. "You are not calling anyone," she hissed. "You apologize and we lose everything. The house, the company, the accounts. Do you want to go back to being a junior associate living in a 2-bedroom condo? Is that what you want?" "I want to live, Brittany," Jason screamed, tears streaming down his face. "I do not care about the money. I do not want to die." "Stop being such a coward," she spat back. "You are not going to die. We just need the medicine. We do not need his permission to get it. We just need to take it." Jason looked at her confused. "What do you mean?" "It is controlled." "You heard the doctor." Brittany laughed, a dry, humorless sound. She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a burner phone. It was not the latest iPhone. It was a cheap plastic device, the kind used by people who do not want to be traced. "Your father is an old man living alone in a rundown apartment in Queens," she said, unlocking the phone. "He is hoarding your life support. He probably has a supply stash there, or at least the laptop he uses to authorize the shipments. We do not need to beg him, Jason. We just need to go in and get what is ours." She dialed a number. She did not look at Jason while she spoke. She looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror, fixing a stray hair. "It is me," she said into the phone. "I have a job. Tonight. Queens. Low security. An old man. I need you to retrieve a laptop and any medical supplies you find." "Yes. Hurt him if you have to. Just get the goods." She hung up and tossed the phone into the back seat. Jason stared at her in horror. "Brittany, you just hired someone to rob my father. What if they kill him?" "Then your problems are solved," she said, putting the car back into gear. "If he dies, you inherit everything by default before he has time to change the will. And as the executor, I can authorize the medicine myself." She merged back into traffic, a small smile playing on her lips. She had calculated the odds. She had weighed the life of her father-in-law against her net worth, and the decision had been instantaneous. She did not see a family tragedy. She saw a business opportunity. She turned up the radio, drowning out the sound of her husband weeping. Tonight, she decided the problem would be fixed one way or another. The rain lashed against the single-pane window of the fourth-floor walk-up. It was 2 a.m, a time for honest men to be asleep and for wolves to be hunting. I was wide awake, sitting in the stiff wooden chair facing the door. My hands rested calmly on my lap. On the small table beside me, a cup of tea had gone cold. I was not afraid. I was waiting. I knew Brittany better than she knew herself. I knew she would not possess the patience to wait for the legal process or the cleverness to find a legitimate loophole. She was a creature of immediate gratification. If she wanted a dress, she bought it. If she wanted a house, she took it. And if she needed a life-saving drug, she would try to steal it. She was predictably consistent, and that made her easy to trap. I heard the scratching sound at the door lock first. It was subtle, professional. She had not hired street junkies. She had paid for quality muscle. The lock tumbled with a soft click. The doorknob turned slowly. I did not move. I did not reach for a weapon. My weapon was already armed and waiting in the shadows. The door creaked open. 3 figures dressed in black spilled into the room. They moved low and fast, scanning the darkness. One of them held a crowbar. Another held a knife that glinted in the stray light from the street lamp outside. They expected a sleeping old man. They expected a victim they could intimidate into silence. The lead intruder spotted me. He froze. He signaled the others to stop. He took a step forward, his boots heavy on the creaky floorboards. "Where is the computer, old man?" he whispered, his voice rough and menacing. "Give us the laptop and the medicine, and you won't get hurt." I looked at him. I looked at the knife. "You are making a mistake," I said, my voice steady and calm. "This is not a robbery. This is a felony, and the woman who sent you is not going to bail you out." The man laughed. It was a cruel sound. "We are not worried about bail. We are just here for the goods. Now tell us where they are, or I start breaking fingers." He stepped closer, raising the crowbar. I sighed. I had given them a chance to walk away. I pressed the small button concealed in the palm of my hand. The room did not explode. It flooded with blinding white light. I had rigged high-intensity halogen floodlights in the corners of the ceiling, pointing directly at the door. The intruders cried out, covering their eyes, blinded by the sudden brilliance. At the exact same moment, the door to the small kitchenette burst open. "Police! Drop it! Get on the ground! Now!" 6 officers from the NYPD tactical unit swarmed into the room. They had been waiting in the kitchen for 3 hours, sipping coffee and waiting for my signal. The transition was chaotic and violent. The thugs tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. They were tackled to the floor. The crowbar clattered across the wood. The knife skidded under my bed. I watched as they were cuffed and dragged to their feet. Detective Miller, an old friend from the days when I built the precinct station, stepped over the prone body of the lead intruder. He walked over to me and nodded. "You were right, Richard," he said. "They came right on schedule." "Did you get the phone?" I asked. Miller held up an evidence bag. Inside was the burner phone the thug had dropped. "We have the call logs. We have the text messages. And we have the confession he is going to give us in about 20 minutes to cut a deal. We have her, Richard. We have enough for conspiracy to commit burglary and assault." I looked at the men being hauled away. They were just pawns. The queen was about to fall. "Call the Chicago PD," I told Miller. "Tell them to pick her up. And tell my son I will see him soon." The adrenaline finally began to fade, leaving me tired and aching. But as the police cleared the room, leaving me alone in the bright lights, I felt a sense of closure. The game was over. I had checkmated them both, and I didn't even have to leave my chair. The interrogation at the Queen's precinct was short and brutal. The man named Vinny, who had led the raid on my apartment, was not a criminal mastermind. He was a hired hammer. Faced with a charge of armed robbery and the potential for attempted murder, given my medical condition, he folded faster than a cheap lawn chair. He wanted a deal. He threw his phone on the table and told Detective Miller to check the last received messages. The instructions were clear. Break in. Hurt the old man if necessary. Get the laptop. The number associated with those texts was not a burner. It was registered to the primary account of Jason Caldwell. My daughter-in-law was smart, but she was arrogant. She had used Jason's personal cell phone to coordinate the attack, assuming that I was a helpless, senile old man who would never involve the police. She thought she was ordering a pizza, not a felony. By using Jason's phone, she had unwittingly framed him for the crime she orchestrated. Or perhaps it was not unwittingly. Perhaps she was setting him up to take the fall all along. At the lake house, dawn was breaking over the water. Jason was sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room, shivering. He had not slept. The fear of the impending organ rejection was consuming him. He kept checking his skin for rashes, checking his urine for blood. He was a ghost haunting his own stolen castle. Brittany was asleep in the master suite, the room she had coveted so desperately. She was dreaming of victory, unaware that her gamble had just collapsed. The silence of the wealthy suburban morning was shattered not by the chirping of birds, but by the screech of tires. 4 squad cars from the Lake Forest Police Department, acting on an emergency warrant from the NYPD, swerved into the driveway. The blue and red lights reflected off the manicured windows, turning the house into a disco of doom. Jason heard the tires. He went to the window. He saw the uniforms. He saw the guns drawn. Confusion washed over him. He thought maybe they were here to evict him because of the money. He thought maybe it was about the company. He walked down the grand staircase, his legs wobbly. He opened the heavy front door before they could batter it down. Jason Caldwell, the lead officer, shouted, his hand resting on his holster. "Step out of the house with your hands in the air." Jason blinked. "What is this? Is this about the bank?" "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit burglary, assault, and battery," the officer recited, grabbing Jason's wrist and spinning him around. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into his skin. "Burglary." Jason stammered. "I didn't burgle anyone. I have been here all night. Ask my wife." "We have the logs from your phone, Mr. Caldwell," the officer said, marching him toward the cruiser. "You ordered a hit on a residence in Queens last night. The suspects are in custody, and they identified you as the employer." Jason stopped fighting. He went limp in the officer's grip. My phone. He realized then with a sickening clarity that Brittany had borrowed his phone last night. She said she needed to call her mother. She had used his device to hire the thugs. She had used his identity to commit the crime. He looked back at the house. He saw the curtain move in the master bedroom upstairs. Brittany was watching. She was not coming down. She was not screaming for a lawyer. She was hiding. She had sacrificed him to save herself. As the officer shoved his head down to put him in the back of the squad car, Jason began to laugh. It was a high, broken sound. He had lost his father. He had lost his company. He had lost his health. And now, thanks to the woman he destroyed it all for, he had lost his freedom. The car pulled away, leaving the house silent once again. The interrogation room at the Lake Forest station was painted a drab shade of gray that seemed designed to drain the hope out of anyone who sat within its walls. Jason sat handcuffed to the metal table. He was shaking. It was not just the fear of prison. It was the creeping fever that signaled the beginning of the end for his transplanted kidney. He kept looking at the door, waiting for his wife. He believed she was bringing a lawyer. He believed she was coming to clear up this terrible misunderstanding. He believed they were a team. When the door finally opened, Brittany walked in. She was not in handcuffs. She was not flanked by guards. She was accompanied by a sleek, high-priced defense attorney who was definitely not there for Jason. She sat across from him, looking composed and tragically beautiful in her distress. She did not reach for his hand. She folded her arms on the table and looked at the detective. Jason felt a knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "Brittany, tell them," he pleaded, his voice rasping. "Tell them you borrowed my phone last night. Tell them I was in bed." Brittany looked at him with eyes that were as cold and dead as marble. "Jason, stop," she said softly. "Please do not make this harder than it already is." The detective placed the evidence bag containing the burner phone on the table. "Mrs. Caldwell, your husband claims you were the one who used his device to coordinate the break-in at his father's residence. He claims you orchestrated the theft of the medical supplies." Brittany shook her head, a single tear rolling perfectly down her cheek. "It was an award-winning performance. Officer, my husband is a very sick man. As you know, his body is rejecting a kidney transplant. He is desperate. He has been hallucinating. He has been paranoid. Last night I was in the sunroom on a Zoom call with my life coach from 10 o'clock until midnight. I have the recording. I have the time-stamped logs. I never touched his phone." Jason stared at her, his mouth falling open. "That is a lie. You were in the bedroom. You took it from the nightstand." Brittany turned to the detective, ignoring Jason completely. He knew he had only 14 days to live without the medication. She explained, her voice trembling with fake sympathy. "He has been talking about breaking into his father's place for days. I tried to stop him. I begged him to just apologize to Richard. But he wouldn't listen. He said he would take what he needed by force. I had no idea he actually hired people to do it until you showed up this morning." Jason felt like he had been punched in the chest. She was using the exact narrative they had tried to use against his father. She was painting him as the desperate, unstable lunatic, and she had the alibi to prove she was clean. "Brittany, look at me," Jason screamed, lunging against the cuffs. "We did this together. You told me to do it. You said we had to take it." Brittany stood up, smoothing her skirt. She looked down at him with a mixture of pity and disgust. "I am sorry, Jason," she said. "I cannot go to jail for your mistakes. I have a life to live." She turned and walked toward the door. The lawyer followed her, Brittany. Jason howled, the sound tearing at his throat. "Do not leave me here. Please." She paused at the door just for a second. She looked back, and for a brief moment the mask slipped. There was no sadness in her eyes, only the cold calculation of a woman cutting off a dead limb to save the tree. "Goodbye, Jason." The door clicked shut. The silence that followed was absolute. Jason slumped back in his metal chair. The physical pain in his side was a dull throb, but the pain in his chest was blinding. He had sold his soul for her. He had betrayed the only man who ever loved him unconditionally for her, and she had discarded him without a second thought the moment the water got rough. He was alone, truly and completely alone. And for the first time since the surgery, he wished the rejection would hurry up and finish the job. The visitor room smelled of industrial cleaner and dried sweat. It was a gray, windowless box designed to strip away human dignity, and it was doing a very effective job. I sat on a bolted-down metal stool, my hands folded on the cold steel table. I was wearing my best suit, the charcoal wool one. I wanted Jason to see exactly what he had thrown away. I wanted him to see the strength he had tried to crush. When the heavy steel door buzzed open, I almost did not recognize the man who shuffled in. It had been less than a week, but the transformation was horrifying. Jason looked like a ghost. His orange jumpsuit hung off his frame as if he had lost 20 pounds in 6 days. But it was his skin that shocked me. The golden tan from his weekends on the yacht was gone, replaced by a sickly, jaundiced yellow. His eyes were sunken into dark, hollow sockets, and his lips were cracked and dry. He sat down opposite me, and the chains on his wrists rattled against the table. He was shaking. A fine tremor ran through his hands, and his head bobbed slightly, as if he couldn't hold the weight of it up. The rejection had started. The kidney I gave him, the piece of my own body, was now fighting him, and without the medication, it was winning. He looked at me, and for a moment, he tried to summon that old arrogance. He tried to straighten his spine, but the pain was too much. He slumped forward. "Dad," he rasped, his voice sounding like sandpaper. "You came. I knew you would come." I did not smile. I did not offer him comfort. I simply looked at him. "I am here to see the prisoner," I said, my voice flat. Jason flinched. He looked at the guard standing in the corner, then leaned in closer, his eyes wet with desperation. "Dad, please. You have to get me out of here. I am sick. I am really sick. My back is killing me. I am pissing blood. The infirmary here, they gave me aspirin. Aspirin, Dad. They do not have the Cyclo 5. You have to sign the authorization. You have to bring the medicine." I watched a bead of sweat roll down his yellow forehead. "You know the terms of the insurance, Jason," I said. "I can only authorize medication for family members. And I seem to recall a court filing where you claimed I was mentally incompetent. If I am incompetent, I cannot sign legal documents, can I?" Jason let out a sob. It was a broken, pathetic sound. He stood up suddenly. The guard took a step forward, reaching for his baton, but Jason did not attack. He dropped. He fell to his knees on the dirty linoleum floor of the prison. He pressed his face against the cold metal edge of the table. "I am sorry," he wailed. "I am so sorry. Brittany made me do it. She said you were old. She said you were in the way." I was confused, Dad. I was scared. "But I am your son. Look at me. I am your flesh and blood. You gave me life. You cannot stand there and watch me die. Please, Dad. Just sign the paper. I will give you everything back. The house, the company. I just want to live." He reached through the gap under the table, trying to touch my hand. His fingers were cold and clammy. I looked down at him. I remembered the little boy who used to scrape his knees and run to me for a bandage. That boy was gone. The thing kneeling before me was a creation of greed and entitlement. "Get up, Jason," I said coldly. "You are embarrassing yourself." He looked up, his face streaked with tears and snot. "But I am your son," he whispered. I stood up. I looked down at him with the finality of a judge delivering a death sentence. "You ceased to be my son the moment you tried to steal my life," I said. "You are right, Jason. You have my blood inside you, and right now that blood is the only thing punishing you for your sins." I watched him kneel there on the dirty floor, his pride pooling around him like the sweat dripping from his forehead. He kept repeating it like a mantra. I am your son. I am your blood. It was his final trump card, the one unshakable truth he believed would force my hand. He thought biology was a contract that could not be broken. I reached into the inside pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. Jason stopped crying. His head snapped up. His eyes widened with a desperate, frantic hope. He thought I was reaching for a pen. He thought I was reaching for the medical authorization form that would save his life. He scrambled back into his seat, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his orange jumpsuit, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. Thank you, Dad. He whispered, his voice trembling. I knew you wouldn't let me die. I knew you still loved me. I did not bring a pen. I pulled out a thick brown manila envelope. It was sealed. There was no writing on the outside. I placed it gently on the cold steel table between us. The sound of the paper sliding against the metal was softer than a whisper, but in the silence of the room it sounded like a gavel strike. Jason looked at the envelope. Then he looked at me. Confusion clouded his yellowing eyes. What is this? He asked, reaching out with a shaking hand. Is this the insurance policy? Open it, I said quietly. He fumbled with the clasp, his fingers clumsy from the toxins building up in his blood. He tore the paper open. He pulled out a single document. It was a DNA paternity test. The header belonged to the same lab that had processed our pre-surgical blood work. I watched his eyes scan the page. I saw the exact moment his world disintegrated. He stopped at the bottom of the page where the results were printed in bold black letters. Probability of paternity 0%. He froze. The paper shook violently in his hand. He looked up at me, and for the first time since I walked in, the fear in his eyes was replaced by a sheer hollow shock. What is this? He stammered. This is a mistake. This says you are not. I am not your father, Jason, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. I have known for 32 years. Your mother had an affair with a tennis instructor the summer before you were born. She was terrified I would leave her. She begged me to accept you. And I did. I signed the birth certificate. I gave you my name. I raised you as my own. I leaned forward slightly, the table pressing against my chest. You keep talking about blood, Jason. You keep saying we are flesh and blood, but we aren't. That is why the kidney match was so poor. That is why we needed the experimental drugs. That is why the rejection is happening so fast. My organ knows the truth even if you didn't. To my kidney, you are a stranger. Jason dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing in the dirt. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was gasping like a fish pulled from the water. The entire foundation of his entitlement, the biological imperative he had used to justify his greed, had just evaporated. I loved you more than a biological father ever could, I continued softly. I chose you. I chose to love another man's son. I chose to build a world for you, and you repaid that choice by leaving me to die in a hospital bed. You thought you were entitled to my legacy because of your DNA. But you never had the DNA, Jason. You only had my love, and you killed that all by yourself. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. You are an orphan now, Jason, in every sense of the word. You are looking at the paper as if it is written in a foreign language, Jason. But the math is very simple. 0%. That is the amount of genetic material we share. That is the scientific reality of our relationship. Jason looked up from the document, his face twisting in a mix of horror and confusion. He shook his head violently, rattling the chains on his wrists. No, he stammered. That is impossible. Mom would never. She loved you. We were a family. This is fake. You printed this to hurt me. I sat back on the metal stool and folded my hands. I did not raise my voice. The truth did not need volume to be devastating. It was the summer of 1992. I began my voice drifting back 3 decades. We were staying at the summer cottage in the Hamptons. I was working 80 hours a week trying to secure the contracts for the Skyline project. I was absent Jason. I own that. Your mother was lonely. You thought you could leverage our blood connection to steal the insurance money. You thought my kidney owed you allegiance. I stood up, buttoning my jacket. That is why the rejection is so violent, Jason. My immune system recognizes the truth even if you didn't. My cells know that you are an invader. You are not my flesh and blood. You are the son of a tennis player who forgot you existed 32 years ago. And now you are a stranger to me too. I turned toward the heavy steel door. The irony is, Jason, if you had just been a good son, the biology wouldn't have mattered. I would have died for you. But you forced me to look at the facts. And the facts say I owe you nothing, not a kidney, not a house, and certainly not a $50,000 drug to keep a stranger alive. Goodbye, Jason. Jason looked up from the dirty floor of the visitation room, and his face was a mask of pure incomprehension. The yellow tint of his skin seemed to glow under the harsh fluorescent lights, making him look less like a man and more like a decaying thing. He wiped his nose with the back of his hand and stared at me. He was trying to reconcile the monster he had become with the man who had just revealed the secret of a lifetime. Why, he whispered, and his voice cracked under the weight of the question. Why did you do it? If you knew for 32 years that I was not yours, why did you stay? Why did you pay for Yale? Why did you buy me the cars and the houses and the kidney? He grabbed the edge of the table, pulling himself up until his eyes were level with mine. Why did you let them cut you open 3 days ago? You knew I was a stranger. You knew I was the son of the man who wrecked your marriage. Why would you give a piece of your body to a bastard? I looked at him and I felt a great wave of exhaustion wash over me. It was not physical fatigue. I thought that if I saved your life, you would finally understand the depth of that commitment. Jason began to weep again, but this time it was silent. His shoulders shook. But you proved me wrong, I said, and the words tasted like ash in my mouth. You proved that I was a fool to believe that nurture could overcome nature. I gave you everything, Jason. I gave you a name, a fortune, and a future. And in return, you gave me an eviction notice. You showed me that underneath the expensive education and the tailored suits you were hollow. You showed me that you did not value the love I gave you, only the assets attached to it. I stood up and adjusted my cuffs. The metal chair scraped loudly against the floor, signaling the end of the session. I wanted to believe that love was thicker than blood, I said, looking down at him one last time. But you taught me a very painful lesson this week. You taught me that some people are just broken, and no amount of money or organs or love can fix them. This document established the trusts, the stock transfers, the real estate portfolio. It was designed to create a dynasty. I ran my hand over the textured cover of the folder. I remembered the day I signed it. I had been so proud. I thought I was securing my son's future, ensuring that his children and his children's children would never know a day of want. I was building a castle for a bloodline that did not exist. The DNA test changes everything. Leonard, I said, my voice steady. In the eyes of the law and in the eyes of nature, he is a stranger. Without a biological link, he has no default claim to the estate under the laws of intestacy. He is not my heir apparent. He is just a man who tried to kill me. I opened the folder. I looked at the clauses that bequeathed the Lake Forest house, the majority shares of Caldwell and Sons, and the offshore accounts to Jason. It was a list of gifts for a ghost. Jason is sitting in that cell right now thinking that even if he goes to prison, he will eventually inherit. He thinks that when I die, the money will flow to him automatically, because that is how it works in the movies. He thinks he can wait me out. I took the thick stack of bond paper in both hands. The sound of the paper tearing was incredibly loud in the quiet office. It sounded like a bone breaking. I ripped it in half. Then I put the halves together and ripped them again. I did not stop until the document was a pile of confetti on Leonard's desk. He has nothing, Leonard. The house is titled to the company, and I am taking it back. The accounts are frozen. The insurance policy is voided. And now his future is gone too. I swept the shredded paper into the metal wastebasket. And Brittany, I asked. Leonard let out a dry chuckle. We just received notice from her attorney. She filed for divorce this morning. She is citing irreconcilable differences and fraud. She claims she was unaware of his criminal activities. She is trying to distance herself from the sinking ship before she gets pulled under. So he has no wife either, I said, staring at the trash can. No money, no home, no wife. And as of 5 minutes ago, no father. It was a total erasure. Jason had spent his life defining himself by what he owned and whose name he bore. He wore the Caldwell name like a suit of armor. Now he was naked. He was just Jason, a man with a failing kidney and a criminal record alone in a cold cell. Draw up the new papers, Leonard Free said, standing up. Leave everything to the Architectural Scholarship Fund at the university. Every dime. I want my legacy to build the future for kids who actually want to work for it. I walked to the door. I felt lighter than I had in years. The tumor was gone. The parasite was removed. He is on his own now, Leonard. Let us see how far he gets without my name to open the doors.